Billionaire found his maid studying late at night, then discovered her secret and changed her life. Before watching the video, please leave a like to support our channel. In a house built for noise, for music, and laughter, there was now only silence. The clock in the hallway struck 2 a.m., its heavy chime echoing through the grand corridors of the Whitmore estate, a mansion that once echoed with life, now hushed, save for a single golden beam of light escaping beneath the kitchen door. Thomas Whitmore, a silver-haired man in his early 60s, descended the staircase with a slow, steady gait. His robe hung loosely from his frame, the wool brushing softly against the polished hardwood. He didn't bother turning on the lights. He knew the way. This house had been his for over 3 decades, through the birth of his daughter, the death of his wife, the rise of his fortune, and the long, lonely quiet that followed. He wasn't expecting anyone to be awake. No one ever was. But as he turned the corner into the kitchen, he stopped. There, hunched over the marble island, sat someone he didn't expect to find. A young woman, petite, shoulders rounded from fatigue, her uniform apron folded neatly on the chair beside her. Her name was Clara Reyes. She was his housemaid. But tonight she wasn't cleaning. She was studying. Thick medical textbooks surrounded her, some worn, some highlighted with fraying sticky notes. Her spiral notebook was filled with sketches of anatomical structures and tiny scribbles in both English and Spanish. A dull desk lamp cast a warm circle of light across the granite surface, and Clara's face, usually downcast and distant during the day, now burned with concentration. Thomas cleared his throat gently, not out of anger, but in surprise. Clara gasped, slamming her book shut in one swift motion. Her eyes widened in alarm as she stood, hands trembling slightly. I'm sorry, Mr. Whitmore, she stammered. I didn't think anyone was up. Thomas raised a hand. You're fine, he said, his voice gentler than he'd intended. I just came down for some water, but what are you doing? She hesitated, then tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I have an exam tomorrow, she said softly. It's a placement test for an online pre-med program. I study at night, only after work. He blinked. You're taking classes? She nodded, a shy breath slipping past her lips. Trying to, sir. If I pass the test, I might qualify for a scholarship. It's a small chance, but I have to try. Thomas stepped further into the kitchen, his gaze falling to the book she had closed. Advanced Human Anatomy. He looked back at her, brow furrowing. You want to be a nurse? Clara's eyes lifted, and for the first time he saw it, truly saw it. The fire, the unwavering determination behind the gentle silence she always carried. No, she said quietly but firmly. I want to be a doctor. He was stunned. This was the same young woman who scrubbed his floors, folded his laundry, and served tea at precisely 9 a.m. every morning, never speaking unless spoken to, and yet, here she was, burning both ends of the candle, chasing a dream that most would have called impossible. He asked, why? Clara took a breath. When I was 10, she began, her voice steady despite the pain behind it. My father got sick. We didn't have money, no clinic nearby, no way to pay for treatment. He died at home. I sat beside him feeling useless. I promised myself I'd never feel that helpless again. The kitchen fell silent again, but this time not from awkwardness, from gravity. Thomas didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her, really studied her, not as an employer sizing up his employee, but as a man recognizing something rare in front of him. This wasn't pity speaking from her. It wasn't a plea. It was the voice of someone with a mission bigger than herself. You're tired, he said quietly. Yes, she answered, eyes unwavering. But you're still studying. Yes, he nodded slowly, as if a truth was settling deep inside his bones. Well then, he said, reaching for the pitcher of water, don't let me interrupt you. Clara looked at him, stunned, confused, and slowly, cautiously, sat back down. Her hands returned to her notebook. As Thomas turned to leave, he glanced back once more, and what he saw in that quiet kitchen, under that single beam of warm light, wasn't just a maid with textbooks. He saw hope, resilience, a kind of silent strength he hadn't felt in his home for years. And in that moment, he realized something simple, yet profound. Sometimes the brightest flame doesn't roar, it whispers. Before the sun even touched the rooftops of the Whitmore estate, Clara Reyes was already awake. The sky was still wrapped in navy blue when she tiptoed through the back hallway, her slippers brushing softly across the cold floor. In the kitchen, she moved quickly, boiling water for tea, slicing fruit, warming the croissants that Mr. Whitmore liked precisely at 8:45 a.m. By 10 o'clock, she was polishing the crystal chandeliers in the dining room. By noon, she was folding sheets with a precision born from years of practice. Tight corners, no creases. Then came the garden, the marble floors, the dusting of books in the study where no one had read in years. Clara never lingered. She never complained. Her presence in the house was like a gentle wave breeze, there but barely noticed. Except now, Thomas noticed. It wasn't sudden. It was quiet, subtle. He began to see her, not just as the young woman who tidied his home, but as someone who carried a different kind of burden. She worked with care, not just because it was her job, but because she respected the space, even though it wasn't hers. He saw how she left an extra napkin folded into the butler's tray when he had a cold, how she wrapped the handles of hot pans and towels so the cook wouldn't burn his hands, how she whispered softly to the gardenias in the backyard as she watered them. And every night when the house fell into stillness, Clara would retreat to the tiny room at the end of the servants' corridor. The walls were bare except for a faded photo of her family and a corkboard pinned with scribbled notes and class schedules. There, under a flickering desk lamp, she transformed. Her apron gave way to a sweater. Her cleaning gloves traded places with a ballpoint pen. Her eyes, once dimmed by fatigue, lit up with focus. She wasn't studying to pass time. She was studying to build a bridge, out of poverty, out of loss, into something that had felt unreachable for so long. She watched free lectures on a secondhand laptop that lagged when the rain got too heavy. She scribbled notes on the backs of old receipts and tucked medical diagrams into her pillowcase. Some nights she didn't eat. Most nights she didn't sleep. But she always studied. One evening, Thomas lingered longer near the hallway after dinner. He heard her murmuring medical terms under her breath: epithelial tissue, systemic circulation, acetylcholine, and then a pause. And then, ever so softly, Clara whispered, "I'll get there, even if it takes me forever. I'll get there." He didn't make a sound. He simply stood in the shadows, heart aching in a way he hadn't felt since his wife passed. He remembered when grief had swallowed him whole, when the mansion had felt like a coffin with gold doorknobs. He'd stopped believing in effort, in dreams, in the idea that people still fought for something that couldn't be bought. But here she was, fighting, every single day, and suddenly the air inside the house felt different, less hollow, less cold. Clara never asked for more, not a raise, not a favor, not even recognition. But Thomas began to leave small gestures in return. A cup of warm tea left outside her door some nights, a new notebook slipped into the laundry basket, a slightly longer conversation by the breakfast counter. He didn't intrude, he didn't ask too many questions, but he watched her. And the more he watched, the more he understood something that startled him. Clara was teaching him how to feel again, not with grand speeches or dramatic acts, but with quiet conviction, the kind that comes from doing the right thing when no one's watching. It started with a cup of tea. Clara found it on the wooden table outside the service corridor one evening, still warm, with a note tucked beneath the saucer. For long nights and heavier dreams. She stood still for a long moment, her eyes misting as she wrapped her fingers around the cup. No one had made her tea in years. No one had remembered her long nights. No one had seen her like this, except him. From then on, their paths began crossing more often, not by accident, but never forced. Some nights, William would sit on the veranda with his cane resting by his side, staring out at the garden his wife had once adored. Clara, done with her work for the day, would bring out a book and sit on the step nearby, not too close, but not too far either. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they just listened to the wind rustling through the lemon trees. Sometimes Clara read softly to herself. Sometimes William dozed off, lulled by the quiet rhythm of her voice drifting through the dusk. But slowly, gently, words began to pass between them. "Do you miss her?" Clara asked one evening, her voice barely above the chirp of crickets. He didn't need to ask who she meant. "Every day," William replied, eyes fixed on a flower his wife had once planted. "But grief, Grief has a strange way of changing shape. At first it screams, then it whispers, and then it just walks beside you, always there. Clara looked down at her hands. I think about my father that way, she said softly. He used to tell me that we carry the people we love inside us like candles. Some flicker, some burn steady, but they're never truly out. William turned to her then, studying her face in the soft lamplight. Not as a maid, not even as a student, but as someone who had weathered storms and somehow still carried warmth in her voice. They began to share more. He told her about the time he almost lost everything in a business deal gone wrong, but it had been his wife's faith that saved him. She told him about her mother's laugh, now rare but still beautiful, like wind chimes on a still day. He told her how the mansion used to be filled with music. His wife played piano every morning. She told him how she used to sing to her siblings when there was no food, just so they wouldn't cry from hunger. Each evening, something unfolded between them. Not love, not yet, but something else just as powerful. Trust. And with trust came healing. William started sleeping through the night again. Clara started smiling more during the day. They became like two planets quietly orbiting each other, never colliding, never rushing, but sharing the same sky, the same silence, the same understanding. And in that stillness, something long forgotten began to bloom again. Hope. Not loud, not grand, but real. The kind of hope that sits beside you and whispers, you're not alone anymore. The envelope was simple, cream-colored, no logo, no grand seal. It sat quietly on the kitchen table the morning Clara walked in, her hair still damp from a cold shower, her shoes squeaking softly against the floor. She stared at it, confused, her name written in clean, careful cursive on the front. Just Clara, not Miss Santos, not maid, just her. She looked around, half expecting a note, an explanation, something. Instead, she found William seated in the library, the soft click of a clock the only sound in the room. Come in, he said, as if he'd been waiting. Clara stepped inside, still holding the unopened envelope. You left this for me? William didn't look up at first. He simply nodded toward the leather chair across from him. Sit, please. Clara sat, her fingers tightening around the letter. Open it, he said softly. She did, slowly, like someone peeling away the layers of a memory too fragile to rush. Inside was a letter and an offer. A spot in a hospital's Saturday community outreach program, designed for students considering careers in medicine. It was unpaid. It was just once a week. But it was real. It was the hospital. She blinked. I don't understand, she whispered. How did you? William finally looked at her. I made a phone call, he said simply. To an old friend, Dr. Patel. He runs the program. But I never applied. Oh, you didn't need to, he replied. I did. Clara's breath caught in her throat. I read one of your notes last week, the one about the free anatomy course you finished. You mentioned a quiz where you ranked in the top 5% worldwide. He smiled faintly. That wasn't luck, Clara. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I don't want charity, she said finally, her voice trembling. William leaned forward, hands clasped. This isn't charity, he said gently. This is belief. Belief in you. You've spent so long giving without asking for anything. Maybe it's time someone gave back. Not because you asked, but because you deserve it. The silence between them stretched, thick with the weight of old fears, new chances, and the quiet miracle of being seen. Then William added one more thing. I know you can't afford to leave this job. That's why the arrangement stands. You still work here, but every Saturday I want you at that hospital, not because you owe me, but because the world needs someone exactly like you in a white coat. Clara's eyes burned. Why are you doing this for me? William's voice cracked just slightly as he answered. Because a long time ago, someone did it for me, and I never forgot what it meant to be given a second chance by someone who expected nothing in return. Clara held the letter close as if afraid it might vanish. I don't know what to say. He gave her a small smile. Say you'll try. She nodded slowly, her voice no more than a whisper. I will. And with that, the first real door opened, Not into a mansion or a kitchen or a world of what-ifs, but into the beginning of something Clara had only dared whisper to herself in the dark. A future. The hospital smelled like antiseptic, floor wax, and coffee. Clara stood outside the outpatient clinic, her heart thudding so loud she thought the automatic doors might hear it. Her clothes were plain, pressed but old. Her shoes were clean but worn at the soles. A canvas tote hung from her shoulder. Inside it, a notebook with her initials scratched on the cover, a second-hand stethoscope, and her dream tucked beneath 2 apples and a peanut butter sandwich. She had walked through glass doors before, but never like this, never into a place where her voice, her hands, might matter. A nurse in navy scrubs approached, tall, brisk, efficient. "You're Clara?" She nodded quickly. "I'm Claudia. I run this floor. You'll shadow me for now. We're short-staffed, which means I expect help, not hesitation. Understand?" Clara swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." The day began in chaos. Patients lined the walls, most clutching paper folders or small bags, eyes tired, anxious. Children cried, phones rang. Forms were misfiled. One woman didn't speak English and clutched a trembling hand against her chest. Clara knelt beside her, gently took her vitals, then used a translation app to calm her in Spanish. Claudia noticed. "Nice," she muttered. By noon, Clara had wiped down beds, organized medicine trays, calmed a toddler getting vaccinated, and memorized the check-in procedures. She barely paused to sip her water. By 3 o'clock p.m., Claudia handed her a form. "You ever taken vitals before?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. Claudia raised a brow. "Show me." Clara approached the next patient, an elderly man with cloudy eyes and trembling fingers. She greeted him softly, asked permission first, just like she'd seen in the training videos. Her hands moved with care, measured, respectful, blood pressure, pulse, temperature. "Like this?" she asked quietly. Claudia crossed her arms, watching. "Exactly like that." Clara smiled just a little. By the end of the shift, her body ached, but it wasn't the ache of scrubbing floors or carrying linens. It was something new, earned exhaustion, soaked in purpose. As she stepped outside, the sunlight hit her face. She squinted, blinked, and for a second thought of her father, how he might have smiled seeing her walk out of a hospital, not as a patient's daughter, but as someone becoming part of the cure. That night, when she returned to the mansion, a cup of warm chamomile tea waited quietly outside her bedroom door. No note, just steam curling upward like soft applause. She smiled. And for the first time in her life, Clara slept not because she was tired, but because she felt at peace. 3 weeks had passed since Clara first stepped into the hospital, and she hadn't missed a single Saturday. Each week she arrived earlier. Each week she stayed later. Her notepad now had dog-eared corners and pages frayed with ink, her handwriting growing more confident, her sketches of anatomy sharper. She had become a quiet fixture, never in the spotlight, but never overlooked. Claudia had started letting her assist more, giving injections under supervision, prepping IVs, helping discharge patients. The younger nurses smiled when she walked by. The older ones nodded in approval, but nothing prepared Clara for what happened on the 4th week. She was double-checking patient charts near the front desk when Claudia approached, holding a pale blue folder. "You've got company," Claudia said. Clara looked up, confused. "What?" "Dr. Levin wants to see you. Conference room B. Now." Her stomach dropped. Dr. Reuben Levin, the department head, the man whose name was whispered in admiration and fear, who had published over a dozen research papers, and who rarely spoke to interns, much less volunteers. Clara wiped her palms on her coat and walked. She stepped into conference room B like someone entering a courtroom, unsure if she was on trial or about to be pardoned. Dr. Levin stood by the window, arms crossed, silver hair, thin-rimmed glasses, a face carved by knowledge and years of expecting excellence. "You're Clara Santos," he said. "Yes, sir." "You're not a medical student." "No, sir." "You volunteer here with Claudia." "Yes, sir." He tapped the folder lightly. "I reviewed your name because 3 separate nurses submitted your name for recognition. That almost never happens." Clara blinked. "I didn't know." He nodded slowly, then opened the folder. These are notes Claudia collected, patients you have comforted, tasks you completed, even suggestions you made on triage flow. Clara said nothing, afraid to speak, afraid to breathe too loud. Finally, he looked at her. I've arranged for you to sit in on the clinical rounds with the first-year students this Monday. Just observe for now. Think of it as unofficial auditing. Her lips parted. Sir, I'm not enrolled anywhere yet. I'm not qualified. He held up a hand. You're not enrolled. Yet. But let's be clear. Talent like yours isn't just earned through tuition. It's revealed through character. Silence hung between them, heavy and full. Then softly, Claire asked, why me? Arlevin's gaze didn't waver. Because medicine doesn't just need the brilliant, he said. It needs the brave. The ones who've lived the questions, not just memorized the answers. A pause. Be here Monday. Wear something white. And just like that, she was dismissed. Clara stepped into the hallway in a daze, her fingers curled around the folder. She blinked twice, unsure if any of it had been real. But when she opened the folder, there it was, a schedule, a seat with her name, a door, not a metaphor, not a dream, a real open door. That night she couldn't sleep, not from exhaustion, but because a new emotion had taken root in her chest. Something stronger than fear. Belonging. The Monday morning air was crisp, the sky above New York a steely gray, and Clara Santos stood frozen on the hospital steps, wearing a borrowed white coat. It didn't quite fit. The sleeves were a little too long, the collar frayed, and her name wasn't embroidered above the pocket like the others. But still, it was a white coat, the kind she had once folded for doctors without thinking she'd ever wear one. She stepped inside the hospital, clutching her notepad like a life raft. Inside the lecture room, 22 medical students were already seated, their coats gleaming with school logos and sewn-in titles. MD candidate, class of 2021. They sipped coffee from expensive thermoses, tapped notes into their tablets, and traded inside jokes she didn't understand. Clara slipped into the last seat in the back. No one noticed. And that was okay, because she wasn't here to be seen. She was here to see. The instructor entered, a sharp-eyed woman in navy scrubs and running shoes. She called out cases, challenged responses, pushed through ethical dilemmas like a drill sergeant in the field. When Clara raised her hand halfway through a case on autoimmune encephalitis, the room quieted. She wasn't even sure why she did it. Her voice shook as she spoke, but her words were clear. The elevated anti-NMDA antibodies suggest a neurological autoimmune response. If left untreated, the patient risks psychosis or catatonia. The instructor blinked. And you are? Clara swallowed. Just observing. The instructor smiled. Well, Miss Observer, you're absolutely right. Heads turned, some surprised, a few skeptical. Clara's heart thudded, but not from fear, from recognition. After the session, a tall student in designer glasses approached her. Hey, he said not unkindly. Which school are you from? Clara paused. I'm not in school yet. His brow lifted. Then how are you here? Just lucky, I guess. He didn't press, but his curiosity lingered. Clara didn't explain further, because her journey wasn't about where she came from. It was about why she came at all. That night, as she walked back to her shared room above the laundry wing, she passed William in the hallway. He didn't say much, just nodded, then paused. Did you wear something white? He asked. Clara smiled. I did. And how did it feel? Clara looked up at him, her eyes soft but unwavering, like the beginning. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm Clara had long craved. Lectures by day, quiet study by night, and volunteer shifts each Saturday at the hospital. But it wasn't the schedule that made her heart race. It was the slow, steady shift in how the world around her began to respond. They still didn't know who she was. Not really. They didn't know she once scrubbed the same kind of tile floors she now walked across with a stethoscope tucked into her coat pocket. But they began to notice her. It started with a second-year resident who lingered after rounds asking, "Where'd you learn to listen like that?" Then came the email, an invitation to assist on a community health project focused on low-income neighborhoods. No fanfare, no promise of glory, just the kind of work Clara had always longed to do. She said yes without hesitation, because for the first time someone was asking. Back at William's estate, the tone had shifted too. His quiet support never wavered. Each weekend, a small envelope waited outside her door, filled not with money, but with hand-picked articles from medical journals, printouts of anatomy flashcards, sometimes even a note in his precise handwriting. Thought this might challenge you. Let me know what you think, W. She never said it aloud, but those notes felt like breadcrumbs left in the dark. Gentle guidance, wordless encouragement. One Saturday evening, as she sat in the garden reviewing her notes by lantern light, William stepped outside. "You're still at it," he said, settling on the bench beside her. Clara smiled without looking up. "Always." He watched her for a while, then asked, "Do you ever doubt yourself?" Clara set her pen down. "Every day. And yet you keep going." She nodded slowly. "Because doubt doesn't mean I'm wrong. It just means I still care." William leaned back, gazing up at the stars. "I used to think certainty was strength," he said. "But watching you, I think maybe it's persistence." Clara chuckled quietly. "Then I guess I'm strong after all." He smiled, just slightly. They didn't speak after that, but they didn't need to. The next week, a visiting professor from the partner university asked a question during seminar. No one answered. Clara raised her hand. She explained a rare blood condition using analogies from cooking. Of all things, the professor stared. "That's brilliant." The whispers started again. But this time they weren't laced with doubt. They carried respect, admiration, a kind of quiet wonder. "Who is she? Where did she come from?" Clara didn't answer, because her life was still being written, and she was too busy living the next line. It arrived on a Thursday morning. Tucked between flyers and a course catalog in Clara's narrow student mailbox was a cream-colored envelope. No return address, just her name, handwritten in careful, unfamiliar cursive. She almost didn't open it. Almost. But something, maybe the quiet shake of her hand or the way the world seemed to hush, made her slide her finger beneath the flap. Inside was a single folded page. "Clara, I don't know if you remember me. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I just needed to tell you that your mother's medicine is working. Slowly, but it's working. Mari passed the national qualifying exam. She said you'd be proud. And Ben, he still draws you in his notebooks. But now he calls you Doc. We don't have much. But because of you, we have enough. Thank you for carrying us this far. Now let yourself be carried too. Love, Auntie Rosa." Clara sat down right there on the hallway floor. The polished marble was cold beneath her, but her chest felt warm, tight. She hadn't spoken to Auntie Rosa in months, not since her schedule had swallowed everything. She hadn't realized how much she missed hearing from home until the words were in her hands, trembling like a living thing. And now here it was, proof that her sacrifices had not disappeared into the void. They had bloomed, quietly, beautifully. That night, she didn't study. She walked instead to the quiet garden behind the library where the roses still remembered her. She held the letter to her chest, eyes turned to the sky. Then she whispered, "I'm still doing it, Papa. I'm still going." Meanwhile, across the city, William sat in his study, sipping lukewarm tea and staring at the board where Clara's letters were pinned. One of them had slipped slightly. He stood, pressed it back into place. His eyes lingered on the words. "I think I'm starting to believe that I deserve to be here." He smiled and whispered back, even though she'd never hear it. "You always did." It was meant to be just another Monday morning, another lecture. Another room filled with polished shoes, expensive laptops, and last-minute coffee sips. Clara sat in the third row from the back, as she always did, not to hide, but to observe, to listen, to learn deeply. The class was immunopathology, dense, unforgiving, and taught by Dr. Helms, a man known more for sarcasm than support. He paced at the front, throwing questions like darts. Can anyone explain the underlying mechanism of type 2 hypersensitivity? Silence. Students shifted. One yawned. Another tapped on her phone, then quietly Clara raised her hand. Dr. Helms blinked, surprised. "You, Miss Santos," she said. "Clara Santos." "Will Miss Santos educate us?" Clara stood, and in a clear, unwavering voice, she explained the mechanism. The antigen-antibody interactions, the cellular response, the clinical implications. She spoke not like a student hoping to be right, but like a woman who had lived through the consequences of wrong answers, through nights of fever with no hospital, and funerals that came too soon. When she finished, the room was still. Dr. Helms cleared his throat. That was correct. Then he added almost grudgingly and eloquent. Clara sat down, but something had risen in her that wouldn't sit again. After class, a student she barely knew approached. Hey, that was impressive. Another chimed in. Are you in the study group? We could use someone like you. She blinked, then smiled shyly. Sure, I'd like that. And just like that, Clara Santos, the quiet girl from the back row, was seen, not for what she lacked, but for what she carried within her. That night, she called Auntie Rosa. They talked about Mari's college dreams, about Ben's newest comic book hero, Dr. Clara. And when she hung up, Clara whispered to herself the words she had never dared to speak out loud until now. I belong here. Far away in the study that smelled of old wood and jasmine tea, William smiled. Another letter had arrived. Clara's handwriting, firm, confident. He pinned it on the wall. One more flame. The sky that morning was gray, not stormy, not weeping, just still, like a held breath. Clara stood at the bus stop, her backpack heavy not with books, but with thoughts. Inside were her grades, still excellent, her scholarship papers, still valid, her white coat, still crisp and folded. And yet she felt out of place. Last night her sister Mari had called, her voice tight with worry. Clara, Mom's meds are running out again. I don't know what to do. Clara had promised she'd figure it out, but as she checked her bank app that morning and saw $48.16 left, the weight of her choice came crashing down again. She had once worked to survive. Now she studied to become. But could she afford to keep going? That day in class, Clara didn't raise her hand. She didn't join the study group. She barely heard the professor's voice. All she could hear was her mother's cough, echoing from 1,000 miles away. All she could see was her sister skipping school to save bus fare. All she could feel was guilt. At lunch, she sat alone. She didn't eat. She didn't speak. The walls felt too bright, the laughter too distant. Later that evening, she returned to her tiny apartment, rented with the last of her savings. Rain tapped gently at the window, a lullaby of doubt. She pulled out the acceptance letter, folded, worn, the ink fading from being read too many times. She whispered to the silence, maybe I can't do this. Then came the knock. Not loud, just enough. She opened the door and found a delivery bag. No name, no sender, inside a hot meal, and a small card. The world needs you more than it knows. Keep going. Tears welled in her eyes. She hadn't written to William in weeks. She hadn't told him anything. But somehow he knew. He always knew. She clutched the card to her chest. And in that moment, the rain didn't sound like doubt anymore. It sounded like permission. To rest. To feel. To begin again. It was a chilly Saturday morning when Clara arrived early at the community clinic. The fluorescent lights above flickered to life as she unlocked the door, her white coat folded carefully over one arm. Today she was shadowing the pediatric wing. There was already a line forming outside, mothers rocking infants on their hips, fathers holding small hands, toddlers half asleep on shoulders. These weren't just patients, they were stories. And Clara was learning how to listen to all of them. She was in the corner of the exam room when Nurse Claudia introduced her to a girl named Maya, 6 years old, with tired eyes and a chest that rose too fast. She's got asthma, but she's terrified of the mask, Claudia whispered. The child clung to her mother, shaking her head. No mask, no mask. The mother's face was lined with exhaustion and fear. Clara felt something stir, a memory of her brother Ben, once the same age, crying in their province as their father held a makeshift nebulizer to his tiny face. Back then she couldn't help. But now she knelt down, not as a student, not as someone in white, but as someone who knew fear. She held out her hand. Maya, can I show you a trick? The little girl blinked through tears. Clara pulled out a glove from the medical kit. She gently inflated it and drew a smiley face on the fingers. This is Dr. Puffy, she whispered. He gets scared too, but he loves bubbles. Maya giggled. Just a little. And Clara took the mask. This isn't a mask. This is Dr. Puffy's magic flute. Want to hear it sing? And somehow Maya nodded. She took a deep breath as the vapor hissed softly. A moment later, her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing slowed. Her fingers reached for Clara's, and she smiled. Claudia watched from the doorway, quietly, and later said only 3 words. You were born for this. Clara didn't answer. She didn't need to, because for the first time, she wasn't chasing the dream. She was living it. She was no longer the girl watching her father suffer with empty hands. She was now the one bringing ease to someone else's pain. And that day, something changed. She didn't just feel like a student, she felt like a healer. Like someone the world had once ignored, now standing steady in its service. Clara had never written letters before, at least not ones that were meant to last. Back home, notes to her siblings were scribbled on rice paper or the backs of old grocery lists. But this was different. After every long Saturday at the hospital, she would sit by the window of her tiny dorm room, pen in hand, pouring her day into careful lines. I saw a boy today, Mr. Duval, just 7, but already familiar with pain. I held his hand through a blood draw. He didn't cry, I almost did. She didn't know why she wrote to him exactly. He never asked for updates, never once replied, but she wrote anyway, not for thanks, not for answers, but because there was something sacred about knowing someone was out there who had once believed in her. Someone who had once said, become who you already are. In his mansion, the study had once been a hollow place, lined with dusty shelves and untouched books. But since Clara had left, it had changed. Every letter she sent, on cheap lined paper, folded with gentle creases, was tacked carefully onto a corkboard. Dozens of them, each one written in the same slanted script, each one signed simply, with all humility, Clara. William Duval read everyone, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times, when his days felt too gray, when his tea didn't taste like it used to, when his house felt like a museum for memories. He'd sit in that leather chair by the board and read. I passed my 3rd diagnostic module. I remembered what you said, that I belong, even when I feel like I don't. Today, a patient asked if I was already a doctor. I told her, not yet, but someday soon. You never asked for my thanks, but I'm sending it anyway with every letter, because you saw me before I saw myself. He never answered, not because he didn't care, but because her letters said it all. They were his reminders that the world could still surprise him, that the quietest faith, invested in a maid with calloused hands and borrowed dreams, could grow into something miraculous. And one night when the rain tapped softly against the window panes and the fire in the study glowed dim and golden, William whispered to the silence, thank you, Clara. Not because she owed him anything, but because she had given him everything he didn't know he needed. Hope, purpose, a second chance at meaning. The hospital was louder than usual. Flu season had crept in like fog, and the waiting room overflowed with coughing patients, tired parents, and exhausted nurses. Clara, now in her 2nd year of training, moved through the chaos with quiet precision. Clipboards, vitals, reassurance, always calm, always focused. But nothing about that night had prepared her for the boy in room 7. He was pale, barely breathing. His mother, a young woman with hollow eyes, clutched his hand like it was the only thread tethering her to the world. The boy's name was Mateo, 7 years old, no insurance, no English, just shallow breaths and a rattling chest. The nurse on duty frowned, flipping through the chart. Could be pneumonia, but the labs aren't back. Doctor's stuck in surgery. Clara stepped closer, gently resting her hand on the boy's forehead. He burned. His breathing worsened. Instinct screamed louder than protocol. She remembered her father, how he had wheezed through his last breath under a thatched roof with no doctor in sight. She wouldn't let this boy become another memory written in past tense. We can't wait, Clara said softly but firmly. The nurse looked at her, hesitant. You're still a trainee. I know, but I'm also the only one here who recognizes the signs of acute respiratory failure. And if you're wrong, Clara swallowed hard, then I'll take the blame. But if I'm right, he lives. With trembling hands but clear eyes, Clara administered oxygen, elevated his legs, requested a stat x-ray, monitored his vitals like a mother watches over a fevered child. She didn't leave his side, not for a second, not when the alarm started beeping, not when the attending doctor finally arrived, breathless and wide-eyed. "Who started this protocol?" he asked. Clara stood, shoulders squared. "I did." He blinked, looked at the monitors, at the boy, then nodded. "You saved his life." Later that night, when the adrenaline faded and the hospital lights dimmed, Clara stepped into the locker room. She sat on the cold bench, hands shaking, eyes stinging with unshed tears. Not from fear, but from something deeper. Pride, gratitude, and grief. For every moment her father hadn't been saved. But tonight, someone else's son had been. And that mattered. In her pocket was a note she hadn't read yet, slipped to her by the boy's mother, written in careful, crooked English. "Gracias, you are our angel." At home, William received her letter days later. It was short, almost casual, but one line made him place the paper over his heart. "They call me a hero now, but really, I'm just someone who never stopped believing in what you saw in me." The car pulled into the gravel driveway, crunching gently under the weight of something far more powerful than tires, the weight of memory. Clara sat in the back seat, hands folded over a worn leather bag, her white coat neatly folded on her lap. She hadn't seen this place in over 4 years. The tall, white pillars, the ivy curling around the balcony, the windows that once reflected her silhouette as she scrubbed them clean. Back then, she entered through the servant's door. Today, she walked through the front gate, not as help, but as a healer. The door opened before she could knock. William stood there, older now. His silver hair had thinned. The cane in his hand trembled slightly. But his eyes, those kind, steady eyes, were unchanged, soft, full, waiting. For a moment, neither spoke. And then he whispered, "Clara," she smiled. The kind of smile that comes from somewhere deep, from a girl who made it. "Hello, Mr. Duval." "No more, sir, not today." They walked through the house slowly. The halls were the same, but Clara wasn't. Every step echoed her story, scrub brushes and midnight study sessions, whispers in kitchens and dreams murmured into cold pillows. And now her name had 3 new letters. MD. They sat together in the conservatory, where the sun poured across the tiled floor just as it had years ago. He poured tea without asking. She took it without apology. Silence passed between them, not awkward, but sacred. Then William spoke. "I kept all your letters, still on the wall." She blinked, lips trembling. "I didn't know if you read them." "Everyone, twice." They shared stories. Her first patient, her first mistake, the professor who told her she had heart, not just brains, and the child who had whispered, "Thank you, doctor," like it was magic. William asked gently, "Amma bi-weekly, do you ever regret leaving?" She paused, looked around at the familiar furniture, the place that had once been her whole world, then shook her head. "No," she said softly, "because what I found on the way back was me." That day, she didn't leave the house with a mop or tray. She left with a promise in her heart to never forget where she came from, but never let it define where she was going. And William? He didn't stop her. He stood in the doorway, hand over his chest as she stepped back into the sunlight. He wasn't just proud, he was changed. The auditorium was full. Warm lights glowed overhead, and proud families leaned forward in their seats. Rows of students in crisp white coats sat in front, each heartbeat loud with anticipation. But none louder than Clara's. She stood behind the podium, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped the paper in her hand. Her speech, one she had written, torn apart, and rewritten again. It was time. Her white coat hung perfectly now, with 3 words stitched in clean black letters across the chest. Dr. Clara Santos. She took a breath, and then she began. "I wasn't born into a life of opportunity. I was born into a small home where dreams were often too expensive to afford." The room stilled, even the rustling of programs stopped. "I grew up watching illness take away the people I loved. Not because there weren't cures, but because we couldn't reach them." She swallowed. "And for a long time, I believed my job was simply to survive." A hush swept over the audience. In the back row, William sat silently, watching, listening. But then one day, someone saw me. Not for what I did, not for where I came from, but for what I could become. There was a man who saw me, not as a maid, but as a story waiting to be written. She paused, her voice trembling but clear. He didn't rescue me. He didn't pity me. He believed in me. And belief changed everything. The crowd shifted. Some reached for tissues. A professor wiped her glasses. Clara continued, eyes steady now. I stand here not just as a doctor, but as proof that kindness is not weakness, that dignity grows in silence, and that faith in someone, even when they don't ask for it, can rewrite a life. The applause began softly, then swelled, a standing ovation. But Clara didn't hear it, not fully, because her eyes had already found him. William, he didn't clap, he didn't cheer, he just sat, smiling. The kind of smile that says, I knew you would. That night, Clara didn't celebrate at a party. She sat on a bench outside the dorm, unwrapping a sandwich and holding the crisp white coat in her lap. And in her pocket, a letter, a final one she hadn't sent yet, to him. The building was modest. 5 rooms, 2 nurses, one faded awning above the door that fluttered in the early morning wind. The paint on the front porch was chipped, the sidewalk cracked in places. But the sign beside the entrance, painted by children with brushes too big for their hands, read, Project Hiwaga, Wonder. It was Clara's clinic. Her dream, born not in luxury, but in longing, not built with inheritance, but with belief. Inside, the walls were bright, yellows and pale greens. Children's drawings were tacked up near the check-in counter. The scent of alcohol swabs mixed with warm coffee and the laughter of mothers chatting in line. A young boy ran across the hallway in socks, a lollipop in one hand and a sticker on his shirt. I was brave today. In one room, a nurse helped a grandmother translate her medical forms. In another, Clara knelt beside a girl with asthma, her stethoscope warm against the child's back. She no longer wore shoes with holes. She no longer worried about hiding her accent. She was the doctor now, the one who understood, the one who cared. William arrived at sunset. He wore a simple coat, slightly wrinkled, his gait slower now. But his eyes, still sharp, still warm. Clara saw him through the window and stepped outside. They didn't speak at first, just sat on a bench near the sidewalk as the neighborhood children laughed and drew suns on the concrete with chalk. Then softly she said, They think this building is magic. William raised an eyebrow. Is it? Clara smiled, brushing hair from her cheek. In a way, it was built on something stronger than steel. He looked at her and then slowly reached for her hand, just for a moment. No words, no pressure, just belief. A quiet touch that said everything. I still see you, I never stopped. Behind them, the sky turned orange. Inside, the clinic lights glowed, soft and golden, like hope. Clara leaned her head gently on his shoulder. They didn't need titles. They didn't need to name what was between them. It was enough to sit together, quietly, and witness what love, true love, had built. The clinic was quiet that evening. The last patient had gone. The nurses had clocked out. The humming of the sterilizer had slowed. Outside, the street lights blinked on one by one, casting soft circles of gold on the sidewalk. Clara stood in the staff room, carefully folding her white coat. As she reached for the hanger, something slipped from the inner pocket. A small envelope, cream-colored, familiar handwriting. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen his handwriting in weeks, not since he had fallen ill, not since the call where he said he'd be resting more now. She opened it with trembling fingers, her pulse quiet but heavy in her chest. Inside, a single sheet, neat, deliberate, every word chosen like it mattered. Clara, if you're writing this, it means you've stayed the course. That doesn't surprise me. But I didn't want to leave without one last thank you. Not for the tea, or the conversations, or the laughter, but for the light. You brought it back into a house that had forgotten it, into a heart that thought it had seen its last spring. I once believed that only youth built dreams. I was wrong. Sometimes dreams are lit by people who never give up. People like you. You gave me something I never expected again. Pride, purpose, peace. And if you ever doubt the road ahead, just remember, someone who had seen the world chose to believe in you because you, Clara, are what the world needs more of. Keep building wonder. With all my belief, WD. Clara held the letter to her chest. Tears came, not out of grief, but out of gratefulness. He had believed in her, not as a savior, not as a charity, but as an equal, as someone capable of turning hardship into healing. Later that week, the clinic hosted its first scholarship day in William's honor. They funded medical supplies for local high school students dreaming of medicine. The plaque they unveiled didn't list his net worth or business titles. It simply read, "In memory of William Duval, he believed in quiet brilliance." Clara walked the halls of her clinic that day in her white coat, his letter tucked close to her heart. She smiled at each child, every mother, every trembling elder who walked through her door. Not because she had all the answers, but because she knew what it meant to be seen. She had been the maid once. Now she was the mentor. As the story closes, let it remind us all, sometimes the greatest gifts are not money or medals, but a single person whispering, "I see who you can be, and I'm not letting you forget it."